creates any more of a problem than for other fisheries, because what you're doing, if you are wanting those 4 or 5 species to be certified, they would be managed under principle
No,
one.
no, we want only one to be certified.
One certified.
But as per this, everything is going to fall greater than 5%, which is in a way bycatch.
Yeah, so those would be treated as main. Again, you don't need to have, you would have bycatch excluded devices, or if you're not wanting to exclude them, it's fine. They would still not be held to the same high level as the principal one species. It's higher than the minor or negligible species. There are management outcomes required, but that would be that your management systems in place are expected, for instance, to not lead to, I'm looking for the terminology, Matt, I don't know if you want to jump in here, not leading or not contributing to a decline below point of recruitment impairment, which is what you want for all the species anyway. It's just that where it's above 5%, that fishery has a potentially bigger impact on that species, which in terms of the certification isn't your target species. So you do need to have you need to be sure that you, as an operation, you're not causing the decline of other species that are part of that ecosystem. Okay.
If you have 4 species which the composition varies, then isn't it possible to certify all that 4 together as one block?
Not at the moment, no. The species are treated separately. We've done some pilot testing on mixed management. I think the pilots that they used were based on the Inter-American Tropical Tunas Commission, where they manage the tropical tunas as a block using albacore, I think it is, or big eye as their proxy. So they've selected that species as being the most vulnerable of the tunas, and therefore if you're managing that on sustainably, you would expect that the other tunas are also sustainable. So that's a kind of mixed species management, if you like, and we did another one, I think, also in West Africa on demersal fisheries, but with mixed success. So it hasn't been carried through. There's more work to be done on the mixed fisheries management. As things stand, you would identify those as individual species. Yeah. I don't know if that's raised more questions or answers, but we can discuss that during the day as well.
Can't you have club it with tetrine being as the main and these others also get certification along with it?
So you need to remember this is all in principle 2. None of these species that are organized in these categorizations would be certified. These are just the other species. You're making a claim against threadfin bream. You're saying this is a sustainable fishery, and what we want to see is that that bream comes from a healthy population, but also that the fishing operation that catches that bream is not causing the decline of other species and the ecosystem that bream exists in. So that's why you're separating these out into the principle 2. So you're not going to make any sustainability or certification claims against these. This is just about saying this fishery is not causing the decline of the ecosystem. I'm afraid this is really oversimplifying things in 15 minutes. We do 1 week capacity building training on the standards. So there's a lot of complexity that goes behind this, and we're happy to talk to anyone individually. I think for the purposes of this, it's just really about creating that awareness of how the standard currently deals with these fisheries. Okay, I think so. Risk-based framework, and then I just really had one last slide. I don't know if I've run over time already. Not to go into any detail on this, but to invite you to look at other fisheries on the MSC website that are potentially in a similar situation to your own. The one that I've picked up is just the Suriname sea bob. Again, it's a tropical shrimp fishery, probably dissimilar in many ways and similar in others, but they've been certified since 2010. A fairly diverse catch profile, around 75 species, And I've highlighted that 3 of those are main, of which 2 are data deficient. Of relevance because those data deficient fisheries would have had to use the risk-based framework, and those 3 non-target main species are exactly what you're talking about here. They are above 5% and they have to be above there needs to be demonstration that the fishery is not causing the decline of those. So been certified now for going on 13 years. Under Principle 1, a number of positives were identified in the fishery by the assessors. The main thing that it's highly likely to be above point of recruitment impairment. And this is the sort of terminology that you need to discuss with the assessment team as well, is how they define highly likely. These sort of thresholds take a lot of a deeper understanding. The harvest strategy in this case for the target fishery is designed to achieve MSY. At this stage, it's still relatively new, so there's not enough evidence that the implementation is delivering on that. The species is not quite up to MSY yet, but in the assessor's view, it's designed to deliver that, and it should deliver that. So there will be a condition on that fishery to ensure that that's the case. And then P2, they've introduced turtle excluded devices. I understand that's not really an issue in India, simply because turtles are released anyway, but they've got turtle excluded devices and bycatch reduction devices, which are considered to be a partial strategy. So it's not a full management plan against the bycatch species, but they have strategies in place to mitigate against that, and that's the sort of thing that assessors are looking for. P3 is all about the management, and this is largely the domain of government, management authority, first of all having the systems in place, but also being able to demonstrate that there's compliance and evaluation of the performance of those systems. So that's a very, very quick fly through of the MSC and how it can be applied in tropical fisheries. As I say, we're around today and for the next few days for anyone who wants to get a bit more information on this. And then next year, probably early next year, we're looking to hold a virtual 1-week training. So that would normally be for people who want a very deep level, the sort of FIP implementers and that sort of thing. And we'll let you know more about that in due course. So I'll stop there and let the program continue. I think I've gone over time, but I think maybe we were ahead of time before that. So hopefully all good. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike, for a very nice and brief presentation. And also, I think it elicited questions. If you have further questions for Mike, you could ask, because we have time. So, yeah.
I think one of the most fundamental aspects of the certification, AMESA certification, is that a fishery may be in good health. By itself, that doesn't, it's not eligible for certification. It has to be proved that it is the result of good management, and there is a good management in place. So the fundamental importance of fisheries management underlies the whole certification, in my view. But however, your framework continues to be too species-centric or too narrowly centric, because in a large country like India, where one thing which is common is poor fisheries management. So even the a priori, look at the whole scenario, will put a lot of these things in the question mark. And you are going through very elaborate analysis when the larger frame analysis would give you what are the weaknesses of the system and whether there is any chance of improving the sustainability. And even if you are able to here and there find some, with great difficulty, some species to be labeled, the larger sustainability issue will not be in any way resolved. It's just a kind of a fundamental question on your overall framework.
Thank you. It's a very good comment. I think what we need to remember is where the MSC fits into the whole sustainability concept, because management already exists. the MSC really is a standard that is designed to reflect and recognize good management. We're not necessarily coming up with ways to manage fisheries. The measures are very much about the outcomes. So the assessors are looking at what management measures you already have in place and are those delivering sustainability. There are many challenges, I think, around managing at a group level, and it's potentially why we've struggled to come up with a mixed fisheries standard. I think it is something that needs to be prioritized, and it has been a piece of work, but we haven't got to the point where we can define what good management in mixed fisheries looks like. We need good examples of that in place, but as things stand, we are simply trying to identify the best ways to recognize good management and to pass that message on to the consumer, which at this stage is species level, and coming back to the point of the eco-labeling, which comes down to species, the consumer wanting to be able to say that that product is sustainable. But there is more work to do. I don't think it's impossible to get there with these tropical species, and there are cases where it's been proven to work.
Would like to respond? He is Mr. Vivekanandan, who is a chief person of a NGO, and also he is looking at trying to certify a very small-scale fishery, trap-caught lobsters down south of India in Tamil Nadu. So he is looking forward to it, but I think he has raised a fundamental question. But you would like to continue the conversation?
Okay. Basically, the larger system would be worth looking at as a prima facie thing before you proceed into individual cases. Because there is, so much of, complete lack of control over the fleet and its operations across the country. There's virtually no exception to this. If something is doing well somewhere, it's more accidental or incidental. So in this kind of a situation, you are at best looking for incidental cases which will help put you on the tropical map. And fleets and others which are, or businesses which are somewhat puzzled with how to handle the Western markets, where the labeling has become now a very, very big requirement, which is a great credit to the a success to your labeling thing. But it has also created new constraints, and unfortunately, rather than put our house in order, look at what is the way to sustain our fisheries, we are trying to use the tail to wag the dog. I'm talking about certification as a problem solving for our fundamental problems of fisheries management. Unless we go to the fundamentals and resolve it, this is a marginal instrument that we can use. By itself, there is a whole lot of things to be done, and many of the stakeholders here are the right people to do that. But this gives them an escape route rather than look at the problems. So this is my critique of the whole thing.
Thank you. You're absolutely right. It is tail wagging the dog. And I think that comes back to the second slide, where it's a case of we exist because of a failure of the system, the global systems. It's a way to try and recognize, and by recognizing, drive change, because you're rewarding certain fisheries and other fisheries as a result are punished is maybe a strong word, but the market is kind of forcing change, and that filters up. It's a tool, it's a mechanism, it's not the only tool. I think where MSC is valuable to fisheries that aren't ready to be certified or aren't looking to be certified, certification just being the recognition of their performance, it's still an outcome that you're working towards. So it provides a framework for stakeholders to identify where the gaps in their performance currently are and where they can start to implement changes. So that's outside of certification. That's really, we've got a small fishery, we've got a big fishery with lots of problems, there's no market demand, or there's insufficient value to it, whatever the case is, it doesn't mean you can't use that framework that still says this is what good management looks like, or this is what a good outcome in fisheries management looks like. So there is still value to aligning with the MSC principles, even when certification isn't the final goal. Certification itself is a market incentive. So that really is the domain of fisheries that are receiving that market demand and are able to put those changes in place to meet that demand and to be recognized. So I'm the first to admit it's not the panacea. It's not the only tool. It's not the only thing that needs to be used. It's part of the sustainability toolbox, but it's been shown to be a very important part of that toolbox. And what we would like to see, if you're looking at India as a whole, would be government and fishers and stakeholders working towards trying to be aligned with what sustainability is according to our definitions, and then for those ones that can benefit from the market, cherry picking those, and those ones go for certification. The other ones being certifiable, to use different language. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Vivek, I think you can continue talking about this. Yeah. So we are actually a bit early for tea. Oh, yes, sure.
Michael, I have one basic question. Pardon me if I'm going very basic, okay? Well, I would just like to understand the certification of MSc. What all does it encompass? What does it encompass totally? Is it the certification of the sustainable fishing activity of the country or of a particular area in that country, or even for the exporter who's really needing this for his marketing? Whether the certification includes the certification of any particular exporter. What does MSc certification encompass totally? This is something which I would like to understand. Which areas would it encompass? Yeah.
Thank you. That comes back to the definition of the fishery in the first place and how it's defined. So it would normally be a gear type, a region, and a species. The more complicated, if you start bringing more gear types in, more species in, or bigger areas, you can do that as part of your unit of certification, but you normally break it down into different units of assessment. So in, I think, all cases, probably it could be, for instance, the whole of the Indian shrimp trawl, it could be the Kerala shrimp trawl, but it would normally be a component, and you would have multiple certifications if you were wanting to do multiple fisheries around the country. It's not really possible to do a country level certificate. What you can have in place at a country level would be management systems aligned with the MSc. That wouldn't necessarily mean they're certified. You would still need to have the assessors come in and take out those chunks that, and assess them per target species. And yeah, I don't know if I'm explaining that very clearly. Yeah. What? It's a species that is being certified, but what we have something called a client and a client group. The client can be a group of exporters, but they wouldn't be certified. It's the fishery that is certified, and they're the custodians of that certification. So it's their responsibility to ensure that that fishery is continuing its certification. Obviously, in the case of exporters who aren't directly involved in the fishery, it would mean that they need to be trying to lobby the fishers, lobby the government to make sure that they are abiding by the requirements of the certification. So they own the certificate, but the unit that is certified is the fishing operation. I haven't touched on a second part to the program, and that's the traceability element from the certified fishery to the marketplace. We have a second standard called chain of custody, and that's where an entity, an individual trader or exporter could be certified, but that's only looking at whether they have traceability or processes in place to ensure that what is coming out of the certified fishery is actually the product ending up on the market. So that's the only time a company would be certified in the MSC, otherwise it's the fishery itself.
What you said is made it more complex, because like what Arjun said earlier, if he is having different products that is exporting to countries and they want MSC certification, how is he going to cover those various products for certification is one aspect of it. And then of course, in that same catch, he says it's true that in the tropical waters, in a particular catch, you get different kinds of species netted into the catch. So that certification also is going to be, ultimately, it comes down to how the exporter or a unit can take advantage of this, right? So that tying up is what we are really looking at as an exporters organization, exporter association. So that's why I asked the question, right? Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And there's normally demand from the market for a smaller number of species coming out of the fishery. So the fishery is still targeting a handful of species. In many cases, there would be multiple bycatch or low-value species that are not certified, and maybe there's still a market for those, but not necessarily a certification market. So it is concentrating on the handful of species going to the MSC demanding markets. Sorry?
Is it mandatory to do certification of the P2 and the P3 along with P1?
So I'll differentiate between certification and assessment in this regard. It's mandatory to assess P2 and P3 in order to be able to say whether P1 is sustainable. So sustainability essentially being the ability of that fishing operation to continue catching that target species into the future. And that means that the target species need to be healthy, but the ecosystem surrounding it needs to be able to support that as well. So the reason that P2 and P3 are assessed is simply to be able to say there are mechanisms in place to ensure that the life support system of the P1 species is intact and being looked after. So yes, it's mandatory to assess those, but they're not certified.
Socioeconomics is probably more important than biology. Socioeconomic aspects are more important than biology in the developing world and tropics. Tropics are also coincidentally or not so coincidentally where the developing countries exist in large numbers. The socioeconomic aspects of fisheries have been indirectly or resolved outside the fishery in developed countries, especially through social security and other measures which are much better established. Here the fishery is the social security for fishermen. So when you have competing fleets, small versus big, gear versus gear, how does your system assess that? For instance, this particular species caught by the trawl has substantially displaced or taken away the share of another gear or another fleet. Does this get reflected anywhere? Is it at all a sustainability issue or not?
Yeah, that's a valuable point. I think we were using the term sustainability, and perhaps I should clarify. In terms of the MSC, it's environmental sustainability. It's the biological ability of that operation to continue. Of course, sustainability has additional elements when looked at more broadly. There's social and economic sustainability is probably equally as important.